Good morning, everyone. My name is Mwetwa Mundia Sikamikami, and I'm presenting small-scale photovoltaic PV capacity under the themes capacity building and technology transfer for sustainable hydropower development and use, and environmental management. So this particular paper presentation is based on Zambia's economic development and rapid population growth that have led to a power sector demand more than doubling between 2000 and 2020. Projection in this presentation as well as in the paper indicate that these trends continue in the future, which means that Zambia will need to invest in adequate power supply to meet the country's growing demand. As part of its long-term energy strategy, the Zambian government plans to exploit the country's abundant solar and wind resources and reduce its reliance on commodity imports. And as such, studies indicate that Zambia is one of the most attractive countries in the Southern African region in terms of solar power potential, which means that small-scale photovoltaic PV could play a role in the future energy needs and the 2030 target to meet the country's energy demand. Before I proceed any further with the presentation, I would like to offer a vote of thanks to Rest for Africa Foundation, from which Antonio Pacero, who is the original publisher and author of this work, made it possible for me to have this information, as well as the team at Ambasciata d'Italia Lusaka, from which Laura Rampanzo made it possible for me to have this information in due time and be able to make this presentation possible today. So the goal of this particular study and presentation is particularly to identify the main policy and regulatory barriers which are delaying investment in small-scale photovoltaic PV capacity in Zambia, as well as wind energy. And furthermore, the focus is on self-producers such as micro and small and medium enterprises, MSMEs, on the public sector, as well as the private sector, and how they can play a role in making sure that the country meets energy demand by the year 2030. So we go over to the next slide. In this slide, I introduced a micro and small medium enterprise, which was founded by myself the year 2018. So the sole purpose of this company is simply to offer innovative solutions and value-added services for our target beneficiaries and target public facilities, as well as private property. And our service delivery has a small and medium enterprise is designed to act as a catalyst for our ambition to become a leading multi-utility company in Zambia and other countries going forward. As BitPop engineers, we drive innovation towards entrepreneurial training and education on various products and services that we offer. Among them, we also value diversity. We look at integrity and commitment to customer service delivery on a standard level, and managing relationships and communicating information, which places us above most of our competitors in the sector. And furthermore, our project focus areas as a company are enabling technologies such as energy and ICT with more use case and impact-focused solutions for productive use and energy efficiency, as well as economic development and community service technologies. When we go over to the next slide, look at the literature review of the presentation. Electricity demand and production in the country is rapidly growing, and it's driven by a sustainable economic development and an increase in population between the year 2000 and the year 2020, as shown in the diagram there. And the Zambian GDP was higher than 110 billion US dollars in the year 2020. About 3 times this was assessed 2 decades before that, in the year 2000, by the World Bank. This shows that Zambia's population has reached an estimated 18 million people, growing by 30% in the last 20 years. Alongside national demand, Zambian capacity grew from 4.4 gigawatts in 2000 to more than 10 gigawatts in the year 2020. However, about 2/3 of the installed capacity is thermal, and 40% derives from coal. And the Zambian population is not limited to an increase in installed capacity, but also to a significant expansion of the grid and growing of off-grid capacity, which is achieved over the last few decades. In the year 1996, the Zambian government, launched a 15-year rural electrification program, which is now called RIA, the Rural Electricity Authority. It's an act of parliament in the year 2003 which, with the aim to increase rural electrification to about 80% by the year 2010. And starting from 18% in the year 1995, the authority has performed better than expected, achieving over 81% of rural electrification in just a period of 5 years, obtaining almost 97% of electrification in the year 2010. And the program included off-grid PV kits, microgrids, and extension of the regular national grid. When we go over to the next slide, we look at the literature review in the second phase and the power sector context of the country. The installed capacity is 3,011 million watts, and as can be seen in the pie chart, 79.7% of this installed electricity generation mix is highly dependent on hydro and is run by the state-owned company ZESCO. We have 3%, which is solar, and then 17.4% is mostly thermal electricity. Zambia's energy mix, as indicated in the pie chart, is highly dependent on hydro, leaving it exposed to droughts, which are likely to increase as a result of climate change year in, year out, especially between August and November around the year, almost every other year. So a decrease in water levels in the main reservoirs as a result of drought has been the primary cause of periodic load shedding throughout the years in the past. In the year 2020, despite an installed generation capacity of over 3,000 million watts, only 1,500 million watts were able to generate electricity for the country, which resulted in a record deficit of about 810 million watts relative to peak demand. Furthermore, diversifying electricity generation sources, wind and solar, will have a double positive effect to meet the country's energy demand and reduce dependency on hydro power in times of periodic load shedding and crisis during those months when we have a lot of sun. As such, solar and wind are indispensable to restoring sufficient generation capacity to meet the electricity demand and eradicate load shedding that the country experiences from time to time. We'll go over to the next slide. We look at the materials and methods. So Rest for Africa produced a study which considered two scenarios of the optional amount of wind and solar that can be integrated in Zambia's mid and long term. And following this argument to add renewable energy capacity, the organization developed a study above to consider the two scenarios in the horizon of 2025 to 2030 to add renewable energy capacity without affecting the whole renewable energy system. So the scenarios exploit how Zambia can be a net exporter of electricity in the Southern Africa region mix. And solar and wind capacity have both increased significantly in both scenarios with a minimum impact on load, reducing dominance on hydroelectric power in the country. So we'll go over to the next slide. So on this particular slide, we look at the findings. Under that, we will look at variable renewable energy integration, where wind and solar power can compensate for periods of low hydroelectric productivity, greatly reducing the likelihood of blackouts and the necessity of load shedding in the country. Furthermore, regional interconnections can further improve the flexibility of the system and counteract the non-programmability of variable RE and allow for benefit from both energy trade and regional market prices within Southern Africa as well as Central Africa. Also, renewable energy development and integration must be met with an equal and parallel expansion and upgrade of transmission and distribution networks, or risk stifling electrification efforts. And the above-mentioned developments necessitate significant investments, which ZESCO is not in position to make, and thus must come from the private sector. And these include off-grid installations as well as mini-grids and solar pico-solar products, as well as agrivoltaics in many rural parts of the country where the national grid hasn't yet reached. So we go over to the next slide. Here we look at the discussion, and under discussion we've got crowding in private sector investment in renewables. So the country at the moment is experiencing a crowding in private sector in renewables, and the country context is shown in the blue graph there, and then the power sector context risks in the brown, and the policy and regulation risk in the orange bar. Increasing renewable energy generation in an efficient and cost-effective manner requires a crowding of the private sector in participation of investment. And furthermore, research as well, which is produced by multiple organizations, shows that when evaluating new projects, the private sector investors and financiers assign the greatest importance to policy and regulatory risks. As such, when we go over to the next slide, you will find out regulatory review of the electricity market in Zambia. Zambia's regulatory frameworks allow a private participation in the segment of electricity value chain, and this has enabled the country to successfully attract some level of private participation in the segments. Among those, there's generation of electricity itself, there's transmission, as well as distribution and off-grid. Under off-grid, we've got mini grids, we've got PICO solar products, and agrivoltaics that are installed in many other parts of the country, like Mukushi and Chipata in the eastern province. However, regulatory barriers to increased private sector involvement remain and are still available in the sector. As such, improvements in these areas are very crucial to the diversification of the electricity mix and development of a competitive and resilient and sustainable power sector in Zambia. Published last December, the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa report underlines the regulatory review of the electricity market in Zambia. So you can look for this particular report. It's available on Rest for Africa website. It's also available on the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa website. And then you can have a read to get a further and better understanding of the regulatory review of the electricity market in Zambia. When we go over to the next slide, we come to the end of the presentation where we look at the conclusion and the recommendations in the electricity market of the country. So in this slide, we can see the main outcomes from the publication and hydro data, which is also available in the very recent report. And there is also a need to strengthen the independence of the Electricity Regulation Board by ensuring its budgetary autonomy, and as well as unbundle the Zambia Electricity Supply Corporation, restructure the market to increase transparency and ensure equal market access, and facilitate for competition within the market and the sector. As such, because ZESCO in the sector here in Zambia is the largest player. It's actually the key player of electricity supply. So when we facilitate for competition, it means small and medium enterprises like ourselves and many other small and medium enterprises that are emerging on the market will be able to come into the market and be able to facilitate for off-grid electricity and agrivoltaics, as well as peak solar products, and then we'll have a competition and equal access in the market here in the country. Finally, there's also need to review the network operation subcode, notably the dispatching rules and procedures, considering increased diversification of the electricity generation mix and the entry of multiple players into the system of the electricity markets in Zambia. With this, I would love to close my presentation and thank everybody for your attentiveness and participating in this particular symposium. Thank you and have a great day.